Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening. All right, hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I have a special guest today. Joe Dunman is an assistant professor of legal studies at Morehead State University in Morehead, Kentucky. He teaches undergraduate courses in a bunch of intense legal stuff that I don't really understand, like torts, and does a lot of legal research and stuff. But he's represented petitioners and plaintiffs in a landmark Kentucky civil rights case, which went as far as the Supreme Court, which we will drill down on later in this interview. He's also the host of two legally themed podcasts, Heightened Security and Parade of Horribles, excuse me. One thing that people will really appreciate about Joe and my listenership is that he is on the board of directors of Nerd Louisville, which is a organization that promotes nerdy things. If you look at Joe's website, he has an Isaac Asimov quote on his blog. So, we gotta love that. Also on the board of directors of House of Ruth, which is HIV/AIDS housing advocacy group. Joe is on my radar because we came from the same small tribe. Joe grew up in the straight edge hardcore scene, basically 2.5, depending upon the traffic, hours south of me in Louisville, Kentucky. So we grew up seeing a lot of the same bands, like your Endpoints, your By the Grace of Gods, which listeners to this podcast will remember Rob Pennington was a guest on our show. And I wanted to interview Joe because I am very interested in punk rockers who grow up to do amazing things. And I feel like he's done some amazing things. So Joe, welcome to Postcards from a Dying World.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I want to get into your background and how you got into things, but I think it's really important first to just kind of give people a little bit about the important landmark cases that you worked on, and then we'll circle back and drill down on those and the process of how that happened. But can you tell people just an introduction to the case that you were involved with that ended up at the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so I graduated from law school in 2012, started practicing law in Louisville. In the fall of 2013, our office, I worked in a plaintiff's firm. We were all self-employed, but we worked under the same umbrella, about 13 attorneys. And a buddy of mine, a mentor of mine, walked up to my little cubicle and he said, "Hey man, we got a phone call. You want to do gay marriage?" I was like, "What?" He goes, "You want to do gay marriage? We got plaintiffs who want to get gay married in Kentucky. You want to do it?" I was like, "Yeah, I want to do it." And at the time, it was 2013. The United States versus Windsor case had come down, which wasn't really didn't legalize gay marriage yet, but we were getting closer. And we had a bunch of couples in Kentucky who were either married in other states but weren't getting recognized, or wanted to get married in Kentucky, and they wanted to sue and they wanted to get married, and so they couldn't find anybody to rep them. The ACLU turned them down. They thought, if you sue in Kentucky, you're just going to lose. What a waste of time. They were kind of right, but I'll get to that in a second. But they couldn't find any attorneys, and my firm did a lot of constitutional rights, discrimination cases, and so we were kind of local experts on that topic. And so I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And so 3 of us from my firm took on the case, which eventually became 2 years later what's known as Obergefell versus Hodges, which is the big gay marriage case where the Supreme Court declared that states could no longer ban gay marriage in the country. Our portion of it was 2 cases in Kentucky, Bourke versus Beshear and Love versus Beshear, which we tried to get as the big name on the case, but failed, unfortunately. We took those 2 cases, and then once we got up to the Supreme Court, we were combined with a bunch of others, including Obergefell, which got the name. So I got to work on the gay marriage case for 2 years of my life, and then almost immediately after, I was one of the attorneys who sued a lady named Kim Davis, who a lot of people know, and who actually I now work in the same town that she lives. She refused to grant marriage licenses to folks who had a legal right to them after Obergefell, and so we sued her and won that case. And all of our plaintiff couples are now married, at least as far as I'm aware, still happily married. And so I worked on the Kim Davis case as well. So those are my two big claims to fame, even though all of my clients were special to me and I love all of them, and all the cases I worked on were awesome before I retired at 36 years old.
Right. Well, here's the thing, and we'll drill down on that case. But what was interesting to me was I followed your work on Twitter and Facebook while you were doing it, partially because it was really cool to me. Like, here's this kid that I usually talk about death metal and old school science fiction with, and all of a sudden he's a lawyer in this huge case, and so it was really cool to see that happen. So I just wanted to whet people's appetite, so you know that we're going to get into some serious stuff, but I do want to talk about where you came from and how you got into things, because for me, part of it is the journey that those of us who grew up on punk rock know that a lot of us feel that if it wasn't for punk rock and hardcore and those types of things, and I would include science fiction in your case too, if we didn't get into these things that got us thinking about grander or bigger or wider issues of the world, we may not have found ourselves in the position to do these things, right? And so, you know, a lot of it is I don't want parents to be scared if their kid comes home with a mohawk, right? Like, right. They may end up the next Joe Dunman. So, like, you know,
yeah, ruining the institution of marriage.
Yeah, right. Or saving it. So
well, it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. You grew up in Louisville, and a lot of people, like, Louisville is a very progressive town, but it's still in the South. And yeah, being on that side of the river, like, I'm not saying that Indiana is a bastion of progression.
No,
I have the experience of living because I grew up in Bloomington, which is like the Berkeley of Indiana.
Right. Well, yeah, the only good town in Indiana. Yeah.
Well, I'd say Indianapolis is coming around, and I got a lot of friends back in Indy who would disagree, but you know, Indy produced your Kirk Catalysts too, you know,
yeah.
and
I mean, whatever.
Yeah, but Indiana progression, you know, we're still kind of part of the South, but being in Louisville, you're still pretty much on that other side of the river. It is the South, really, honestly, right?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you grow up in Louisville? How did you get into punk rock and all that? Like, what's your story, Joe?
Well, okay. So you talked about science fiction earlier. So I guess my interest in different things, let's call them different things, right? A different subcultural stuff was in middle school. I started listening to metal, like Metallica, Megadeth, stuff like that, 80s era Metallica, Megadeth. And then started reading science fiction, mostly Asimov, the big Bradbury, the big quote unquote mainstream golden age stuff. And those two things, one, like metal taught me that music could sound different, right? There was a different kind of music out there that people didn't talk about. You know, my parents didn't know anything about it. They weren't against it. They just didn't. My dad had no reference. He was a classic rock guy, and he's like, yeah, it's a little too heavy for me. My mom was into like 80s country. And so, but I was a good kid. I didn't get in any trouble or anything, but I liked the loud music. And I tell people now, it's like, I like texture to my music. I just like a lot of texture, and metal had a lot of texture. I also started reading science fiction, and that started to, I was a Rush Limbaugh listening child conservative until my sophomore year in high school. When I read Stranger in a Strange Land, right? And of all things, Heinlein is known as this big right-wing figure, right? This libertarian right-winger. But that book, like, helped me understand, like, the relative nature of culture, right? That it all depends on perspective. It all, someone who comes from a different place may think of things totally differently, and that makes sense, right? It makes sense that they do that. And so it really, like, I mean, overnight, I read the book and I was like, holy shit, the world's everything's a lot more complicated than I've been thinking it is, you know. And I had a very conservative grandfather who pushed a bunch of like Limbaugh and Thomas Sowell and a bunch of other horse shit onto me as a teenager. It dawned on me like, no, the world's different. It's bigger than that. And then shortly after that, about the same time, a buddy down the street named Tim gave me Start Today, right? Gave me a tape of Gorilla Biscuit's Start Today. And I listened to it and I was like, well, this isn't metal, right? This isn't Metallica, but this shit is awesome. This is hard as hell. And this, you know, and this band rules.
No, that's an all-timer record for me. And when I was in high school, Start Today was, you know, I was already straight edge when I heard Start Today, but it was like that Gorilla Biscuits album was what made me think like, I want to be more serious about this because I really like it. And, you know, it was a foundational record and I still consider it an all-timer top 5 record. So.
Yeah, it's something about it. Like I heard that and it just, I mean, it sparked something inside of me. Now at the time when he gave me that record, I had no concept of the hardcore scene. I wasn't going to shows. I mean, that was literally my introduction to hardcore. Very shortly after that record, I started going to Louisville shows. And so this would be about late '94, right as Endpoint and Falling Forward and all those bands are shutting down. I saw Endpoint once. I missed Falling Forward. But I missed Sunspring, but I did get, but I came in right at about late '94, early '95, and there were a ton of stuff. Hedge was taken off. By the Grace of God was getting underway. I mean, it was still a great era, like '90s era Louisville. Elliott was taken off. So there were a ton of great bands. I mean, there was a summer of '96 and summer of '97. There was literally a show every single day. You go to Sparks down in downtown and there was a show every day of the week. And so it was literally, and I was finishing up high school. I wasn't quite going off to college yet. And so that was, I mean, my junior and senior year of high school were just amazing. Lots of touring bands came in, of course. I mean, all the big touring bands hit Louisville. And so, yeah, it's just literally, I mean, it just could not have been better timing for me. And of course, like when I first got into hardcore, I wasn't straight edge. I was kind of a heavy drinker, 16 or 17. And my mom was drinking, and so I always had alcohol available. But I had a couple bad experiences, and I had a ton of friends that were already straight edge, and I was already like, Destroy the Machines was a huge favorite record of mine when I first got into hardcore. Other than
for those who might not be into hardcore, that Destroy the Machines is an album by Earth Crisis, and at the time I was living in Syracuse, which is Earth Crisis' hometown.
Right?
So,
yeah. So
yeah. So I missed out on
that record.
Yeah, I missed out on that Louisville period, but I moved there right after Destroy the Machine, so I was there when they were writing Gomorrah Seasons.
Yeah. And so like that was another one of the early bands that I got into, and I loved Destroy the Machines, and I knew all about, I had a lot of friends that were straight edge, and I knew all about it. And at first I was the cool kid. I was like, oh, come on, you guys, a bunch of Republicans, blah, blah, blah. But then like, it dawned on me early on, I'm very introspective, very self-aware. I was like, this alcohol shit's just not, I don't like the way, my mom handles it. I don't like the way I handle it. It's like, meanwhile, there's a bunch of cool ass bands that I like, and all the friends that I know that are straight edge are awesome. And so I'm just gonna claim straight edge. And so that was late '96, late '95, I guess '96. And I have claimed it ever since. It never stopped making sense to me. And so still today, if people, if it comes up, I'm like, yeah, I claim straight edge, absolutely. So yeah, so that's kind of the progression. Then from there, I just got older.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I should, again, this is a thing of like, I know some people are from our scene and some are not, but straight edge is just basically a drug-free subculture of punk rock, and that is the community that I've been straight edge since '89, so I got a couple years on you, but just a few. So I'm one generation ahead of you in hardcore terms, but that can be the difference between Frodo and Gandalf in hardcore terms. But but that's cool too, because I think you and I, one of the reasons I think we've bonded online all the time is we kind of have similar backgrounds, got into science fiction, got serious about science fiction, got into metal, and then got into hardcore. And a lot of the same records and things. So a lot of the same books, same records. So
Yeah.
But the difference, I think we might have been at some of the same Endpoint shows in '94 or in that era, because I was still in the Midwest at that time. But those Endpoint shows in the early '90s in Louisville are legendary. They were huge. The success of that band locally is just kind of weird and legendary. And the reverberations for your hardcore scene in Louisville, I think Endpoint, even after they were gone, I think their ghost or their kind of vibe created this kind of more thoughtful brand of hardcore that you know, you guys weren't like a tough guy city, right? So like,
not really. No, we had a few crew members here and there that dabbled in being dicks, but for the most part, Louisville was a very accessible scene to anybody. And it's funny, right? We mentioned I almost missed Endpoint entirely. But one of the first local records that was recommended was Catharsis, right? Endpoint Catharsis. Joe, you got to listen to this record.
Yeah.
And it's like, I wore that CD out, right? I mean, I cannot believe it didn't fall apart. And so Rob, right? You had Rob on, and as you've mentioned hardcore generations, right? You and Rob are in the generation just ahead of me. You guys are about 10 years older than me, or so. I just hit 40.
Rob actually has a couple years on me.
Yeah. I mean, he's very old. Let's make that clear for your listeners.
He just turned 50.
Rob is extremely old. But I mean, he was the closest thing to which, you know, in Louisville, you know, a celebrity you can get. Now in the heart, and he and a bunch of other people in the scene were very clear, you know, up on stage. Look, we're not celebrities. We're not better than you. We're not special, which of course also drew me to hardcore, right? That you could be friends with all of your favorite bands. It wasn't a barrier and it's a tour bus coming in. And so I really looked up to Rob, because Rob, like you said, Rob sang, and a bunch of other singers sang about stuff that wasn't stupid. It wasn't love songs. It was about the world around us, and from a perspective of empathy and concern for others, and empathy for animals, and empathy for the environment, that you couldn't hear anywhere else. I mean, like, the biggest thing, the pop cultural phenomenon around it, it's like, MC Hammer and shit, and it's like, it's not it's just a different world, and I was really drawn to that. And of course, at the time, this is just before the internet too, and so it was still zines and mixtapes and all the rest. And Jesus, I feel lucky having slipped in right at that moment before it all changed.
Yeah, well, and that's one thing Rob and I talked about in our conversation, was two things. We talked about that, I didn't use the term father figure, but he ended up with this kind of father figure role to a whole city of kids that were growing up in the hardcore scene, and there was a special weight that he had to learn to live with, right? And there were times where it got too much for him, but at the same time, like what you said about like getting into that special time is being in there before the internet, and being there before before Victory Records really took over, and all that stuff. I think being a part of the Midwest hardcore scene, there was like a real family atmosphere, and and that's why I think a lot of the older generation of hardcore kids, that's the ones that we're going to be talking to a lot on this podcast, all ended up doing really cool things with their lives, because they didn't have things handed to them. They had to learn how to do the shows, to do those things by themselves, and then they got really good at doing these things. But was there a moment where, do you have like a kind of standout moment where you feel like the hardcore scene kind of pushed you towards like, I got to do something more serious with my life, or do you think that kind of happened organically some other way?
Well, yeah, so I didn't go to law school till I was 29. It was a delayed entry to law school, and I went to law school more out of concern that my bachelor's degree was getting me nowhere, right? I was working at the University of Louisville in the data entry department. I went to college as a major in sociology and history, and I think hardcore had a big influence on that, right? I wanted to learn more about the world around me, understand America and things globally. Sociology was a huge wake up to me. I mean, I really learned ways to think about other people in the world that I think have always benefited me. Then I just kind of I just got a job and I went to work at U of L, and I was doing as a manager, like a low-level manager, making like 38 grand a year. And they had tuition remission. And so they were like, we'll pay for half your tuition if you want to go to school while you work here. I was like, well, I'll go to law school. What else am I doing? And so I enrolled in law school, but the whole time, right, the idea, I didn't know what I was getting into. Like, I didn't know anything about law. I was, a pretty smart guy, obviously. I did well in the LSAT and everything, but I didn't know what I was getting into. And then once I got in there, right, I realized, like, wow, the law is just really a tool, right? It's a tool for power. And whoever wields it, whoever speaks the magic language can really get stuff done if the conditions are right, if the situation's right, the timing is right. And it really, the power of it all really sunk into me. And I was like, you know what? I am a do-gooder at heart, right? I'm a conscious person, and I want to help people. Let's see what I can do. Let's see if I can use this law shit to help other people. And so after I graduated, I did car accidents for about 10 months and didn't really enjoy it. And I fell in with a group of professional do-gooders who were mostly civil rights attorneys, mostly plaintiffs attorneys who sued the shit out of the government and cops and anybody who beat up at somebody else. And I was really drawn to that, and then I started working that, and then just fell into some stuff, right? I didn't seek out, gay marriage. I didn't seek out any of the stuff I did, but I fell into a lot of good work and was able to help people. So yeah, so kind of, I mean, at the whole time, like, I always think of myself as a hardcore kid, right? And I try to live my life consistent with those values, right? I'm helping others. I'm taking things upon myself if I can. I'm being empathetic to others. At least these are the values that I pulled out of hardcore. Other people just learn how to hit people in the face while the music plays or something. But I learned a lot of, don't trust the government, trust other people, help other people as much as you can. And it's funny too, because I am now politically far more radical than I was as a hardcore kid. And I think back to that all the time. Like, I've become more radical as I've gotten older. And as I become a lawyer, I've gotten more and more radical, less and less interested in maintaining many of our institutions than I used to be. So it's funny how that goes, but it's just like a lifelong progression. And of course, I still listen to all those bands, right? I still listen to the shit out of 90s hardcore. I listen to a lot of new hardcore too, but a lot of the old stuff I still listen to, and it's still very close to me. And so yeah, I mean, that mindset has never left me. It's motivated me, at least in the background, my whole life.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't. It's very rare that a new hardcore band. In fact, I got made fun of because a couple of years ago, I told a bunch of my friends, I was like, "Hey, I found a new hardcore band that I like," and then I was told that I was cheating by picking Fireburn because they're all older dudes doing a new band, and I was like, "Hey, no, but it's really good." And then I realized, like, even the bands I think are new are like have been broken up for 10 years. So I keep up more with metal, honestly, because I feel like I'm more of a metal dude, but spiritually I'm more of a hardcore guy. You know what I mean?
I do. That's exactly. So I go to far more metal well, forget the year of COVID or whatever, right? But
yeah,
over the past decade or so, I've been to way more metal shows than I have hardcore shows. But I have been to a lot of hardcore shows too. And man, I mean, the scene is still well alive. I mean, there's kids, 20 years younger than me are keeping it going and fueling it. There's some awesome bands. It's way, at least in Louisville, it's way more diverse than it used to be, right? I mean, there are kids and trans kids and kids of a whole spectrum of backgrounds that, still in the 90s, it was mostly white dudes, right? I mean, we had, Louisville was an open and accepting place, but I mean, mostly the people drawn to the music were people that look like us. And so it's less so now, and that's so good to see.
Well, when I lived in Portland, I was working at Cleveland High School, and there was a group of kids that were like freshmen, sophomores at the time. And like one of them was wearing a 7-second shirt one day. And I realized at one point that I had seen 7 Seconds live like a full 15 years before this kid was born. Right?
Right.
And then I was like, that's when time, you know, when time
Yeah.
catches up to you and you're like, or it was at least 10 years. It was at least 10 years before. Yeah. And then, and like this kid's shocked. He's like, hey, this teacher knows 7 seconds. And I'm like, dude, you cannot be that way now.
No.
Because
No.
because all the old dudes are around. Like when I was a kid, if you had a teacher that was into punk rock, it was shocking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And,
especially early punk rock, I mean, it's just it drew a different group of kids, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
The nerdy, upwardly mobile types were not usually drawn to punk rock in the early days. So,
well,
I don't know.
Well, and that's what my novel Punk Rock Ghost Story, a lot of it was using the ghost story to examine the difference between punk rock before the internet and after the internet,
Yeah.
And how
Yeah.
like people don't realize that before Nirvana, it was not cool to be different, and like people wanted you dead. And Rob and I talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
And growing up into hardcore and punk rock after Nirvana is a completely different thing, because it got, Nirvana kind of made it okay to walk around your school looking different. And
2 points about that. First of all, yesterday, so I go to the campus gym on a regular basis. I try to train pretty often. And there was a kid in the gym yesterday with a Nirvana t-shirt on. And I was like, that was as if I had worn like a Led Zeppelin t-shirt in high school, it would have been the exact same thing, right? This kid is wearing a classic rock t-shirt. He was born after Nirvana broke up, right? After Kurt Cobain died, this kid was born. And so I thought that was funny. The second one was like, I came into hardcore, 95, 96. My senior year in high school, we were the cool kids, right? The hardcore kids were the cool kids. There were popular girls who wanted to date me, right? That was weird. And the guys like Chris Higdon from Elliott Falling Forward, he went to the same high school I did, and he was about 5 or 6 years ahead of me. Very different back then, right? They were still, chased by the jocks and stuff like that. By the late 90s, suddenly counterculture, alternative stuff was cool, and I picked a great time to be into it. Let's just say that. So
yeah, far better than we did.
Yeah, I had it so much easier. I mean, we were.
Hey, there's pluses and minuses to that. Like you learn how to defend yourself. That's a good thing. So
we were real soft. We were real soft.
Now, eventually, I do want to tease this too. That people should stick around, because I'm going to save this for the end, but I do want to nerd out on science fiction with Joe a little bit at the end. So we'll talk about your key favorite science fiction books, and I'm going to try to give you some recommendations and tie it into for the listener. So, so you went to law school and you end up with this case. Now, this had to be different too, because once you were given this case, like your partner's just saying, hey, do you want to do this gay marriage thing? How much did you realize that you were going to become personally, because you're in a lot of ways becoming engaged in these people's marriage. You're a huge part of their marriage. So you're going to get to know these people better. You're going to get to know, and it's going to take on a totally different meaning. Like, we become invested in the artists that we listen to, right? And we learn things about them, but you're in a situation now where you're becoming invested in these people's lives and in a very intimate way.
Yeah. So the thing about being a lawyer is, right, you're a medium for other people. You stand in and, you're there to translate a complicated system on behalf of somebody else. And one thing they don't teach you in law school, you're going to spend a lot of time as a life counselor, right? You spend tons of time telling people what not to do, what they should do, trying to coach them through really tough situations. I mean, I dealt with clients who just gotten fired. I deal with clients who were seriously injured, right? The worst part of their life. and you have to reassure them and help them and give them good advice and
You
stuff.
need to have a bedside manner, as it were.
Absolutely. And so I'm pretty good about, I'm naturally, I think I'm a good teacher. I think I'm a good coach. I can empathize with other human beings. I see myself in other people all the time. And so that came easy to me. But man, I know a lot of attorneys who are really bad at it and they don't teach it. So, but so with the gay marriage case, so at first we took it on and it was a shot in the dark, right? We had no idea if this thing was going to be successful. The case, after the lawsuit was filed, it was assigned to a Republican judge in a federal judge in Louisville named John Hayburn, who was, it turns out, an old family friend. He and my dad were buddies years before. But so we got assigned to a Republican judge and we're like, oh, man, we're just going to lose. We're just going to lose. And then we're going to have to appeal and keep losing and see how this goes. But at first it didn't really sink into me the gravity of the situation, right? But we got to meet, as we met all the clients.
So, Joe, one thing too. So you were saying that they don't really teach this in law school. Now you're a teacher. Are you making a point to teach counseling in a sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the benefit. I'm in an undergrad program, right? I'm not a law school professor. I'm an undergrad professor. And our program is geared towards students who eventually go on to law school or go straight into law practice as paralegals. And yes, it's constantly, look, you're going to have people crying on your shoulder. You've got to be ready to help them, right? And
that's good.
With the caveat that you're not a licensed health, like mental health professional. And so, but be prepared for that. You're going to have to carry other people's misery on your shoulders for a while. I mean, and that breaks down a lot of attorneys too. We have a really high suicide rate, really heavy alcoholism in the law because of the weight of carrying other people's problems. It's very difficult, and the stress of the adversarial nature of our job. But anyway, so like it really.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's good. It's good. But as we talk to the clients, we start asking them questions, right? Most of our clients had been together at least 10 years or more. There was a couple from Bardstown, Kentucky. You probably know where Bardstown is. It's just south of Louisville. They'd been together 40 years, in the closet for 40 years. They had been roommates, quote unquote, for their entire lives. When they drove up to Iowa to get married in 2013, they held hands under the table in court because they were afraid other people would see them. Like, you start to realize like the nature of the stigma that was placed on gay couples and whatnot by talking to all these clients. And they tell, and they cry, and you meet their kids and all this stuff. And you really get to realize like this, marriage is not important to everybody, but to these folks, it was really, really important. It was deeply important to them that they get the social recognition that they felt they deserved. And at the time, I'm not currently married, but I was at the time, and it made me feel very deeply about my own marriage and stuff. And so like it really started to sink in, and it took off then when we won. The first case in the lower court, in the trial court level, in front of that Republican federal judge, he said we win. He said, yes, absolutely, Kentucky's laws are unconstitutional. You have to recognize gay marriages from other states. We did not see that coming. It was a great surprise. Right. But then it started to sink in, like, now, this is the law now until the state appealed. And then when the state appealed, now we got to go to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, the next level of the federal judiciary. And it really started seeing. Now there was media attention, right? I was doing a press conference or an interview every couple days. I was also starting to get death threats, which was a nice change of pace, and so starting to get anonymous threats saying we were destroying the institution of marriage and society, we were communists and all the same thing you hear about everything.
Yeah.
And so it really started to sink in how big of a deal it was becoming. But also for the clients now had hope, right? They were like, my God, our marriage is valid for at least 3 days until the state appealed. And then it just built up. And then we went to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals and we lost, right? The Judge Sutton wrote an opinion that said, no, actually, the gay marriage bans are perfectly constitutional. That is when it really sank in, because that was the only court to do that. All the other federal circuit courts had said, no, gay marriage must be allowed. And so when they wrote the Sixth Circuit opinion that actually the marriage
just because, or like what was?
Oh, federalism. It's up to the states. This is a democratic question, not a constitutional question.
Okay. Gotcha.
And Sutton's a Republican appointee. He was going to be on the Supreme Court, except that he ruled in favor of Obamacare. Oops. And so that took him off all their short lists. But he said, no, actually, the state can ban gay marriage if it wants. That is when it sunk in, because we knew, as the only court that had done that, now we were going to the Supreme Court, because there was a circuit split, right? The circuits in the other all over the country had said, no, gay marriage must be allowed. And the Sixth Circuit said, no, it can be banned. And so with that split, we knew, holy shit, we're going to the Supreme Court. And by this time, and of course, it's 5 total lawyers, the 2 who originated the complaint, and then the 3 from my office who were doing most of the grunt work, all the writing. I had to write 2 Sixth Circuit briefs in about a week. Those are 14,000 words apiece. We had a very short window to get those filed. I spent every waking moment of my life for 2 weeks writing those things. And when we lost, we realized now it's serious. Now we're going to the Supreme Court. And so we took on some help from, they had a clinic out at Stanford University's law school. They have a clinic to help Supreme Court cases, and the ACLU came on board to help us, and they were awesome and very helpful. And so now it's a big team, right? And now it's a big serious operation. But leading up to that moment, right, it was like, we're a tiny team of local lawyers who have just opened this huge Pandora's box of civil rights litigation. And so, yeah, and then from then on, and then I found myself, I also had that moment when I was walking into the United States Supreme Court on argument day in April of 2015. And there's a huge throng of people cheering and screaming at us and declaring that we're going to hell. And me walking across that huge plaza with all my clients, my fellow colleagues, walking into the building for argument day. I mean, that was, and then walking down the steps afterwards, that huge crowd of people was just surreal, absolutely surreal.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that almost nobody else would ask you about that experience. When you're walking in there and they're all yelling all these things, did any hardcore songs jump into your head at any point? Like, did you, well, you had like a free moment and you're thinking like, holy shit, I'm in this weird moment. Like, I don't know. You may not have, but I just
no. But I mean, I had very frequently. I've had moments all throughout my life of seeing myself as a nerdy kid sitting in front of Sparks in Louisville on a hot summer day, waiting for the next band to go on. Right? There's no air conditioning in there. We're all sweaty, so we're sitting out, and I'm sitting on the sidewalk waiting for the next band, thinking, "What the hell am I going to do with my life?" Right? Who am I? What am I? What am I going to do? And then to that moment being like, how the hell did I get here? Right. What bizarre chain of events led to this moment? And so,
you have totally slipped in a line from a hardcore lyric in one of these big law documents, haven't you? Have you slipped one? Because there are Earth Crisis lyrics hidden in my novels all over the place.
Oh yeah. I mean, very subtly here and there. Well, right now I'm writing a textbook about religion and the law, and, Ray Capo's going in there. There's a couple cases on the Krishnas. And so I've got a picture of Ray in there as an example of a Hare Krishna believer. And so of course, little things, very subtle references will be in there where they make sense. But yeah, I mean, not outright. And I've never quoted a band as a legal authority.
I'm not saying that, just for one thing, like I've if you look in my novels or my screenplays, there's almost always like a deep cut line from like a song like Constrict by Earth Crisis. No, I'm not quoting Firestorm, but but there'll be like a line, and it's funny because like there's some that are more obvious. I think I had somebody one time say From Protest to Confrontation or something.
Nice.
In one of the things, but I just, they happen because I can't help it. And now I think it's funny. So now I do it on purpose, but I just imagine. All right. So anyways, but you're getting death threats and all this stuff. Your team, I don't know. Do you think you took this a little differently because of like the world you came from, or like the fact that you were a hardcore kid, or like, I don't know.
So our team, the law firm I worked in was really awesome, right? It had a big diverse group of people, none of whom played golf. Like it was amazing that I was able to practice law without anybody asking me if I wanted to play golf, because golf sucks, and what a waste of time. But so So two of the attorneys of the 13 in my office were actually high school dropouts who went back to school and then got law degrees and became very successful attorneys. My buddy Dan, who probably my closest mentor and friend, Dan Cannon, it was kind of hardcore adjacent, right? I mean, had a lot of similar, same friends. He played guitar. He was a guitar teacher, and so he wasn't. I don't think he went to hardcore shows like I did, but at least friends with friends and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
All the folks in the firm, they weren't all the same. There were a couple frat boy country club folks, but everybody had the same general fuck the system kind of mentality, right? That we were there to be troublemakers as attorneys. We're not there to defend the company. Every once in a while, we defend a company if the case made sense. But mostly we were there. We were fighting for workers. We were fighting for folks who have been downtrodden, people been beat up by police, stuff like that. Those were the cases that we took. And so we had a unified sense of purpose, I think, as I call it do-gooding, right? There were just a bunch of do-gooders. And we were all on the same page as far as that went. And so it was a very easy group of people to get along with. And, not, to my knowledge, I was probably the only, full-on 90s hardcore kid going to shows every day. But everybody had the same general mentality. It was a very punk place in a lot of ways, as much as a bunch of rich lawyers can be, right? It was a very punk place in that the law they were doing had that mentality, right? And we were fighting the system. We were standing up for the little guy. We were challenging authority whenever it made sense. And so, yeah, it was, and everything every case I took on, I tried to be consistent with that idea.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and when the death threats come rolling in, and then people that's when you realize probably you're thinking you're obviously thinking of your clients and the stakes for them, a lot of it, but it kind of forces you to confront the stakes that however misguided these people are, but you're thinking about the stakes that they have too. You have to. And then it can, you're kind of forced to think about both sides of it for a little bit.
Well, yeah, and it really, it helped me understand a lot of privilege that I enjoy, right? I'm a straight white male raised Christian in the United States. Nobody has ever told me no on anything. Anything I've wanted to do, no one has ever told me no. And to see, I've always, right, I've been anti-racist and anti-fascist, since the moment I got into the hardcore scene. But to really, I have to, legally speaking, step into the shoes of other people and represent their interests and realize that how damn easy I've had it. It really, and the kind of threats that I was getting was something that they couldn't hold hands in the mall without people threatening to beat them up, right? It's something I have never experienced. And even as a hardcore kid, because I came in at the time when counterculture suddenly got cool. And so seriously, it really sunk in how damn coddled I'd been my whole life. And so that was an important wake-up call. And it also, it helped me recognize that, look, having been coddled, I have incredible power. The least I can do is use it to help other people, right? And to stand in. If I'm the only voice that the judge is willing to take seriously on this matter, then I'll be that voice, right? I'll stand up there as the straight-laced, suit-wearing, straight guy and say, these gay people deserve respect and legal protection just like anybody else. So yeah, it helped me wake up just how good I had it and how much that enabled me to help others.
Yeah, and I had it on a smaller scale, nothing like going to the Supreme Court, but during the ridiculous years where we were fighting to keep the Chargers in San Diego, all of a sudden I found myself in meetings with the mayor in a suit, right? And even just being in the meeting with the mayor, I'm just thinking to myself, I've had funny moments where I would I've been, I was listening to Misery Index on my way into this meeting, when I was walking down the street, and then here I am in this meeting with the freaking mayor, right? And I just want to be whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways,
yeah.
So it is this weird thing when you're kind of playing both sides and you're you're a little different, and and then it's also a weird thing too. I had an experience where I ran into, at a football game, I ran into one of the mayor's main advisors when he was plastered. And to just
Yeah.
see the guy who I took as this very serious public official, like so wasted he could barely stand, I was like, it kind of took pegs out of it for me where I was like not as intimidated afterwards because I was like, I've seen you be an idiot.
It's
So
amazing, right? It's amazing because as a hardcore kid, I always feel like a kid. For some reason, I still feel like I'm 15 years old half the time, and I assume that other people see me as 15 years old. But everybody's full of shit, right? Everybody is a douchebag in some way, and you get up there in front of a judge, and you realize like this guy is a dummy, right? He makes all the same mistakes everybody else does. He probably makes worse mistakes than I do. You know, I don't even drink. And you realize like the authority that we ascribe to people with our brains, even not just in the letter of the law or whatever, but the authority that we ascribe to people in our heads just does so much work that that disempowers you and or makes you feel small. Really, these are just folks. I mean, they're just faking it like everybody else is. It's not, and it's. I think going to law school and becoming a lawyer really helped me appreciate that
but
everybody's
still
as they go.
but still walking into the Supreme Court to argue a case is like a metal dude walking on stage and walking, like it's a big deal.
It is. So it's weird because during that whole time in my head, I have two conflicting ideas, right? This institution is incredible. It's huge. It's historical. It's very important. As a lawyer, right? This is the pinnacle of my career. I am not going to do any better than this. There are millions of lawyers who will live and die and never have a case get here. On the other hand, the Supreme Court is absolutely full of shit. 100%. It's full of shit. It's a vote of 9 ideologues that are appointed for political reasons. It is not rooted in law. It's not even a court really in the way that we generally think of courts. It has way too much power. Shouldn't even have to be in front of them begging for people's rights in the first place, blah, 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 right? And so I have those two conflicting thoughts in my head at all times. And boy, it is
lifetime appointments is such bullshit.
Bullshit. Yeah, and it was all a good idea, I think, right? The idea was
time,
that, right? Maybe you take them out of maybe make them less political because then they're not having to run for re-election stuff. But I always joke, I was like, the only worse way than electing judges is appointing them, and the only worse way than appointing them is electing them. There's just no good way to put somebody into that kind of powerful role.
I mean, just think about what that word judge means outside of our hardcore context, because it's a really good context for hardcore kids. But
when you mentioned citing a hardcore, I was like, I should cite and just put in the footnote judge, right? And see if anybody wonders what judge I'm talking about.
The case of bringing it down, but yeah, the funny thing about just the idea that somebody like, oh, this is a person that gets to judge someone's fate. And, when you really think about it, it's a really kind of, weird and messed up thing. But, that's what you guys do. I mean, that's why we need advocates and we need people out there who understand the law and will fight for people. So that I don't know. But yeah, it is funny because you're right. You did get a chance that many great lawyers will live their whole lives and never get a chance to do that. And, that's the thing.
And that's a great segue into what I'm doing now, right? I mean, after we won that, and then the Kim Davis case, it realized that I peaked way too early. By the end of the gay marriage case, I'd only been practicing 5 years. I mean, not even 5 years, 3 years. I'd only been practicing 3 years. And I was like, what else am I going to do that comes anywhere near this, right? I mean, traffic tickets. I mean, not that those aren't an important area of the law. That I have lots of friends who get traffic tickets and I help them. But what am I going to do now? And so
that's like Ted Alexander, from my buddy from upstate New York. He's from Ithaca, and he had never been in a band, and he went to summer camp with the singer from Saves the Day, like when he was a kid. And never been in a band, and all of a sudden joined Saves the Day playing guitar right before Through Being Cool came out. Next thing you know, he's touring with Green Day. And then he was like, I couldn't do it anymore. I was done. He did one band, really. He got to tour and play stadiums and all this stuff, and then he was like, I'm over it, and then ended up becoming an academic and Well, the last time I
Yeah.
saw Ted, he was going to Reed College to become an academic. But
Yeah.
he just said I peaked too early. It was, and you were kind of the same thing. You 5 years into it, you're at the Supreme Court. That's crazy.
Yeah. So 5 years, and I'd always been like the trial level work. I practiced 5 years and never took a case to trial. Most cases don't go to trial anymore. With the exception of a couple that got dismissed, I settled everything. It was what I like to call easy money. We litigated for a couple of years, and the other side wrote us a big check. And so I did that for a while and never went to trial. But I didn't like the trial level litigation stuff. I like the appellate work, right? They're just arguing about the law at the higher level of court. It's much more academic, and I'm much more. I mean, college was my favorite time in life. Law school was my favorite time in life, even though it was hard as shit. And so I was like, you know what? Mostly I like talking about the law and writing about the law. Why don't I just try to do that? And so I totally lucked into this job at Morehead State. I was friends with a friend, my friend Ben Carter, who's a great friend of mine, practices law in Louisville, and I was working with him. I'd left the firm that we won the gay marriage case with. I left that firm. It was too expensive to work there. It's like $1,200 a month for a cubicle. And so I was like, I'm gonna wind my practice down, try to find a teaching job. And so I moved over with Ben, and he got a call out of the blue from a professor here who was like, "Hey Ben, we need somebody to fill in. A professor of ours just quit. Can you take the job?" And he was like, "I can't do it, but I know a guy." And so he turned the phone over to me, and so here I am. I've been here 4 years now, teaching law classes to undergrads. And it is literally the best job I've ever had. I've had like 5 different careers. I just turned 40 and I've had 5 careers. And this is easily the best one by far.
Oh, that's great. And you get to inspire a whole new generation of do-gooders.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I already know a couple students have gone on to be Federalist Society members. And so they're dead to me. But everybody else is doing good work, I hope.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. You have a chance to influence them, and it's cool
Take a shot at it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool too, because I don't know a ton of you Louisville kids, but 3 of the ones that I know are teaching at a college level, which is, you, Rob, and Duncan, and it is, something that I see, because I always thought Louisville was like one of the smarter. Because, back in the day, we used to travel to shows in Columbus and Dayton and Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
When you were in the Midwest, you went to Indianapolis, and
Yeah.
all those scenes, I can point to kids from all those scenes that are doing cool things now. But I always thought of Louisville as like one of the smarter towns, and the fact that you guys are all teaching is kind of cool.
Lots of public school teachers too. Most of my close group of friends now are all either teaching in the public schools or college professors. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's really cool. Well, and that's one thing Rob and I talked about is there's a lot of us that came out of the hardcore scene that ended up doing work or working with people with disabilities. That's what I do for my day job. And then, and I know, especially from Syracuse, there's like 5 or 6 old Syracuse hardcore kids, like, for example, like Ryan Canavan from Dialysis and Pain Like a Hex. And he does the support work too. So it's like, that's a job that's, more giving back than some jobs. But, like I said, each of these scenes, I can point to, business owners, people who are doing labels, doing cool things from each of these towns, and kind of, making their way. And that is really cool. All right. So I've taken you up a lot of your time. So, and I teased this. So I do want to just nerd out on science fiction for a little bit. But one thing before that is, if you're on the board of directors for Nerd Louisville, and it sounds like you had this mission, I just had this cool thing where an old coworker of mine wrote me to tell me that she's run out of science fiction books for her 10-year-old to read, who's like this insanely smart kid at 10 years old, right? Who's already like, I need more books like Andy Weir, 10 years old. And then I realized, and I had this whole conversation with her about, hey, your kid's a dork. Really go for it. Really push this, because this is awesome. it sounds like you guys had a whole like nonprofit that's just like helping the nerdy kids, like, find resources.
Yeah. Okay, well, so I'm no longer on the board of Nerd Louisville. When I moved to Morehead, I resigned from the board.
Oh,
So
okay. But you were for a long time.
I was a founding member. And yeah, the idea was to create a network, it's a nonprofit and it does charity work. But the idea was to create an organization to bolster nerdy stuff in town. And it's, video games, role-playing games. Most of the original 3 members were all D&D players of various sorts. And, I until COVID ruined it, I had a regular D&D group with some buddies that we need to revive. And eventually, very shortly, we started fundraising and then donating books and games to the library and other organizations around town to foster youth participation in nerdy stuff. We also had a podcast for a little bit. Mike, the founding member, Mike and I did a podcast. We got to interview Larry Elmore, the fantasy artist who did the original D&D art, or I guess the 2nd edition D&D artwork. He lives in Litchfield, Kentucky. We went and hung out in his studio, his amazing garage studio where all these iconic
really cool
paintings of dragons and heroes. He's getting up there in years now too. So we got to do a lot of cool stuff with that. But yeah, Nerd Louisville has lived on long. I didn't need me, and so I left, and now it's still churning along, doing great work, donating D&D handbook, players guides and stuff to the library so kids can play. Buying Magic the Gathering starter kits. Magic's really my big gaming fix. Great game for lawyers. But donating Magic sets and stuff, working with local game shops and stuff.
Yeah, all I know about Magic is Brian Keene is a horror writer I'm friends with and know through in his podcast he would talk about playing Magic all the time with his son, and I was like, yeah. I didn't get it because it's like it was after my nerd time, so I didn't.
Yeah, if you like just playing with rules all day, it's literally I'm going to fight you with this rule against your rule. It's really, and it's also expensive as hell. It's really, it's not a.
Once you get into it, I'm sure it is.
Oh gosh, it's insane.
Yeah, well that's cool. I think the idea that of promoting these things, I wish more cities would have something like that, and definitely parents, like, well, it's like my wife was talking to one of her sisters, and she said something about her sister said, like, I'm worried that my kids are growing up to be total nerds. And she was like, why are you worried?
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's great. You should be.
They're going to be okay.
Yeah, they're going to be fine. And I know, but anyways, all right. So let's talk science fiction, okay? Because what I want to do here's my idea. Because I know you're a golden age guy. So
yeah, I'm way out of touch. I'm way out of touch. Just so you know that.
So I'm gonna find some. We're gonna go through some of your favorite golden age works, and I'm gonna find you three new wave 60s authors or 3 books from the 60s new wave that you may not have ever heard of, and I'm going to assign them to you.
Okay, and I'm going to write them down.
Okay, and then we're going to find 3 21st century science fiction books that you haven't read, but we're going to start with, give me like your 5 favorites and why they're your favorites, so I know what I'm working with here.
Foundation, easily the favorite. The original Foundation trilogy, all of Asimov's works. Well, let's say, so I am a huge, let me clarify. So I love Isaac Asimov's writing. Recently, I realized that he was a horribly sexist, womanizing.
Yeah, we all learned that.
Fondling. Yeah. See, I read that, and so and of course I always suspected, because I'd heard rumors about that in various ways, but I hate, right? What a damn shame. Nevertheless, I still love his writing. I'm the kind of person who is at least open somewhat to separating art from the artist.
I am as well.
Also, he's dead, right? I mean, we can't dig him up and punish him now. So the original Foundation trilogy, his individual story that had the biggest impact on me was Nightfall. Nightfall was really a big deal to me. as someone who felt very mildly the vengeance of the mob later on, I definitely, that story always stands out to me. How once your perspective changed, you can lose your mind. But obviously, like I mentioned, so Foundation and Nightfall were big. I was never really into his robot books, not until later.
So you didn't like the Caves of Steel, the robot?
I mean, I've read those, but those were space books to me. They less robots, more general space for some reason. I read them all. I didn't really.
Naked Sun was really pertinent to our quarantine situation. So
Indeed.
I accidentally read Naked Sun right at the beginning of our quarantine, and it was
perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Yeah.
And I will say that. So yeah, those were big in my mind. Bicentennial Man, I read in law school. I was assigned to read Bicentennial Man as part of a law and literature class, and that helped. That was a great story. I don't think I'd read it up until that point. So mostly I was focused on his big Galactic Empire books. Those were my main focus, and mostly my interest as a kid. Other than that, let's see, really enjoyed Stranger in a Strange Land was a big book. I also really like Starship Troopers. I know people are conflicted over that. I mean, it really helped me understand fascism in some ways. And so I think Starship Troopers is a good book. So things, I mean, Bradbury's stuff, Martian Chronicles, Fahrenheit, all those books. I mean, mostly, if somebody were to give you, here's start with the basics. Like I was really into the basics. But also, I mean, I read Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin later on and really loved that book, of course, especially as my politics started getting more radical. So I really appreciate her. And of course, now I'm not staring at my science fiction bookshelf right now, so most of it's escaping my brain.
Yeah, see, I'm lucky. I got mine right here. So.
Yeah, it's all law books in front of me, so.
Yeah, and this particular shelf right here is my science fiction reference shelf. This is all nonfiction. So I would highly recommend you read Asimov, yeah, whatever. But this book, The Futurians,
yes,
is the whole history of that whole group of friends and how they got into things, which is super fun. But
Arthur Clarke's Childhood's End was a pretty good book that I enjoyed. Stuff, but mostly the greatest hits of the greatest hits are what really got me started as a kid.
All right, so we need to get you a little deeper into science fiction. So let's start with New Wave from the 60s. Some things like, I'm going to give you a couple names, but I'm going to give you 3 specific books. Have you read Canticle for Leibowitz?
Yes. Okay. I read that recently, actually, and really loved that book. So yes.
Yeah, that is, to me, my 2 favorite, or what I think are the 2 best science fiction novels of the 20th century are Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner and Canticle for Leibowitz. I think are like the 2 best. I'm not going to make Stand on Zanzibar my recommendation. However, I do think eventually you probably will want to read that. That book predicted mass shootings as being like a thing in 1969, because that book is about overpopulation. And but John Brunner, in my opinion, is one of the best science fiction writers of the 20th century. And he also wrote a novel called The Sheep Look Up, which is it's my number 3 of all time horror novels. And it's on my top science fiction list as well, because it's both.
Nice.
And it was a huge influence on my novel, Ring of Fire. But still, that's not where I'm going. I'm going to suggest, let's see, let me look at the shelf here. I'm going to suggest the work of Norman Spinrad for you. He's still with us, but he is also, like Le Guin, he's an anarchist science fiction writer.
Go on.
Yes, and I'm going to suggest one of what I would consider to be his anarchist Dune, which is The Void Captain's Tale by Norman Spinrad from the 80s. Even though it was written in the 80s, he comes from that 60s new wave.
Okay.
Now, have you you've probably read the classics with Philip K. Dick, right?
Yeah. That and let's see, I had a cyberpunk phase for a little bit. So I've read a couple of Gibson's books. Canonical I read during a post-apocalyptic phase. I was going through playing a lot of Fallout, and so I'm a big gamer nerd too, and so I was playing Fallout 3 and 4 in New Vegas, and got really into. So I read The Road and Canonical and a couple others that escape me now, but that was a dark spring for me.
Yeah. So Spinrad is a syndicalist. He's an anarcho-syndicalist.
Yeah.
He's an expat that lives in Paris. We have interviewed him for the Dickheads podcast.
Nice.
It was one of the hardest interviews I ever did. He like basically wanted to rip my head off at the beginning of it, but he chilled out when he realized I knew his work really well. But just to give you an idea,
so typical of that type.
Just to give you an idea, Norman Spinrad, what a provocateur he was. He wrote a novel called The Iron Dream, which was his middle finger to Tolkien. And what he did was he wrote The Iron Dream as if he was writing a novel as Hitler, as if Hitler had not become the leader of Germany, but had immigrated to the US and become a pulp sci-fi writer, and ended up writing a novel called Lord of the Swastika. And the entire book is this fascist fantasy, basically. Like, it's almost unreadable because it is written as Hitler having this like kind of fascist wet dream. But when you look at it, if you dial back, you realize all he's doing is criticizing Tolkien. So, so just to give you an idea of what a provocateur Norman Spinrad is.
That's meta on a level I can't comprehend.
Yeah. Let me see if I have Iron Dream right here. And you look at the cover, it's Hitler on a
that's sweet. Yeah.
On a moped, and it's like it's really Norman Spinrad is a guy you should know. So I think you should start with the Void Captain's Tale.
Yeah, I'm not going to start with Iron Dream. I'm gonna save that one.
Yeah, it was intentionally written to be terrible, so you have to like go into Iron Dream.
Noted. Noted.
Yeah, and also the FTL drives in the Void Captain's Tale are powered by orgasms, but that's a whole other weird thing. So he's number one is Spinrad.
Yeah.
Void Captain's Tale. Number two, have you read any PKD?
Yeah. Do
Androids Dream, probably?
Yeah, of course. The whatever became Blade Runner, Minority Report, stuff like that.
Okay, I think you should read the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldridge.
I've heard of it and never have read it. So
it is PKD's masterpiece. So I think you should read that. Okay, and then one more from that era. I am going to say you probably read Samak, right? From the era before. That's not that era, but he was earlier. I'm going to go with Barry Malzberg. You should read Barry Malzberg. And he had a book called Beyond Apollo. And Beyond Apollo is like, it was written in 1972. It's kind of like a fuck you to like all the nationalism surrounding the Apollo program.
Nice.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But he's just an interesting author. You should know. We interviewed him too. He was a little bit kinder to me in the beginning.
That's good.
He's still with us, Barry. But he's just a radical voice that you should know. And I might have gone Le Guin, but I know you've already read Dispossessed.
I've read 3 or 4 of hers, so I'm familiar.
On that note, for our modern reads, the first read I'm going to give you is a book that is incredibly influenced by the Dispossessed. And specifically, and this was the first interview we did on the Dickheads podcast, was a writer named Carrie Vaughn, and she won the Philip K. Dick Award for a novel called Bannerless. And Bannerless is right up your alley because it is a post-apocalyptic murder mystery taking place in an attempted anarchist subculture after climate change collapse.
Yeah, that's exactly where my head is all the time now.
So, and there's a sequel called The Wild Dead. They're both really good, but Bannerless by Carrie Vaughn is right up Joe's alley. And I think,
all right.
Yeah. And when I interviewed her, I had just finished rereading The Dispossessed, and then I read Bannerless, and I was like, holy shit! You'll see. There's
Okay.
It's a totally different kind of story because it's set on Earth, post-apocalyptic, but it has lots of themes and ideas from the dispossessed,
All right.
transfigured. Have you ever read Always Coming Home by Le Guin?
No, I haven't read that one yet.
Well, The Dispossessed is like Anarchist 101, and Always Coming
Yeah.
Home is a master class by Le Guin. It's not an easy read. It's kind of like reading the Scaramillion by Tolkien, where it's like, oh my gosh, this is so freaking dense and I can barely get through it. That's Always
Yeah.
Coming Home, but I think you might dig that, but that's not one of the recommendations. That's on the side. So number one of the 21st century novels is Bannerless, Carrie Vaughn. The next one I'm going to give you is the Binti trilogy by Nnedi Okorafor. She's a Nigerian American, teaches at SUNY Buffalo.
Spell that title.
Binti is Binti,
Okay.
and it's a trilogy of novellas, but you can buy them all collected now.
All right.
And it's really great Afrocentric science fiction, space opera, but really good. So that's the other one.
All you had to say was space opera, and you had me.
Now, but I'm going to go with a right-wing author for number 3, and I admit this, but I want to preface this that even though this author, whenever he talks on Twitter, I want to pull my eyeballs out.
That's most authors. That's okay.
But have you read any Neil Asher?
No, well, nothing more than a short story or two.
Okay, so he has a novel called The Skinner, and The Skinner is one of my favorite. It's like, it's been compared to Master and Commander meets Dune.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I think that's not the best. It's Master and Commander meets Dune meets Cronenberg. Body horror.
Oh. Okay.
They're forgetting that whole body horror part, because the body horror part is part of what makes The Skinner totally amazing, because the ecology,
title, like The Skinner. Yeah.
Yeah. The ecology of the planet they're on is really nuts. And it's a really good 21st century read. So on that,
all right,
Joe, I'm going to assign you those 6 books. You can take 10 years to read them, but those are ones that I'm going to recommend to you. Although I really do think you should read Bannerless. You should go right out and read Bannerless, because I think that one's going to.
Yeah, I'll hunt it down. That sounds good. I am way behind on my recreational reading, I have to admit. I am currently writing a book, and so all I'm doing is digging through stupid court cases.
Right, because you're writing a textbook, which is
it's just the worst. But it's good for my students, terrible for my brain. But judges are just the worst people, just so that's clear. Anyway, yeah. No,
well, I watched my father write a bunch of textbooks in our house, so he was a political science professor. So
yeah, I mean, luckily this is a case book, so it's 300,000 words right now, but almost none of them are mine. So but the hardest part is just editing. I've spent the last month and a half editing, so it's very grueling. But we're getting there. It's almost done.
All right. Well, on that note, if people want to follow you on Twitters and the like,
God help them.
Yeah. Well, you get some good law content, but also random talks about video games, music, and science fiction from time to time there. So
nobody. Oh, and I am on this. I put it on the back burner right now, but my magnum opus as an academic is an article about the law of Skyrim. And so I'm an obsessive Elder Scrolls player, Skyrim, Oblivion, games like that. I am currently 18,000 words into a play-by-play of all the legal themes in the Elder Scrolls universe and around the era of Skyrim. It's unreadable. It has no target audience, but it's not going to help me get tenure. But my God, I have to get this thing out of me. And so
that sounds incredibly nerdy.
I mean, the footnotes alone are there's going to be like 3 dudes who read this and are like, that's awesome. That's great, man. I totally get that. everybody else is going to be completely uninterested, but I have to write this thing. I have to get it out of me and cast it into the world. So
okay, and you know, this is something totally different, but 3 metal records that you think everyone should listen to.
Oh my God, there's no way. There's no way just 3.
Well,
okay, so
essential metal records, death metal records, anything. Yeah, just give it to us.
Oh, thank you. Okay, narrow it down to death metal. That really helps. All right, so things that I listen to all the time over and over. Bloodthirst by Cannibal Corpse. Huge Cannibal Corpse fan. Bloodthirst is my favorite record. Let's see. God, this is impossible on such short notice. Let's see. Origin Entity, Death Grind. Love Origin Entity is an incredible record. And then something, let's see, let's go more technical. Let's see, what's Necrophagist. I don't know how you say it.
Necrophagist, I believe.
Necrophagist, the record that has Stab Wound on it. I forget the name. That record is incredible, and I'll figure it out in just a second.
Have you seen the video of the guy that covers Necrophagist on flute?
No, but I have to now.
Yeah, it's really intense. I didn't think it, like, when I first heard about it, I was like, that's, and then I was like, okay, no, it is very impressive, actually. So.
Yeah. And lately I've been really into Gatecreeper and Vastum are 2 newer death metal bands that are they're not as technical, more straightforward, old school stuff. But Vastum is really awesome, and Gatecreeper really good. So those are the 2 new ones, but the other recommendations are for older bands.
Well, and I know you're a big Catatonia fan. That's something that we share. We're both Catatonia fans.
Oh yeah, yes. I would have said Great Cold Distance for my top Catatonia record. I know lots of people. The eras of Catatonia are very
divisive.
People, right? Yeah, very divisive.
I think the new record is amazing.
I can't get into it. I'm not into the new one.
That's really weird. That's really weird. I really love it.
Well, I know it's weird.
They have a death metal band, Bloodbath.
Yes, they do.
Then
I really enjoy Bloodbath.
Yeah, and but you know who I've been rocking out lately in that vein, the progressive metal thing? Have you discovered Leprous?
Nope.
Oh, dude, I'm going to send you on it. Watch live videos.
Leprous, like people with leprosy?
Yeah, the band. Yeah, they're called Leprous. It's the band that the musicians back Isam from Emperor and his solo project.
Okay.
And so I first discovered them because there's a song that Isam plays guitar and sings on for Leprous. And I heard that song and I was just like, holy crap, these guys are amazing. And the thing about Leprous is that their sound is so strange that every time I've told people to listen to them, I would say, make sure you listen to a couple songs, make sure you try them live, because some of their songs are so weird. Like their new single is so weird. It has a full string section and it's so weird that like when you first hear it, you're like, I don't know. But then the more you listen to it, you're like, holy crap. And the musicianship is really, really good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm definitely interested.
Yeah. So, all right, we can nerd out about metal all day.
Yeah.
But Joe, thank you for your time, because I think people will be really excited to hear about your perspective as far as being a punk rocker turned lawyer to punk rock to the Supreme Court. Is a pretty cool trip and journey. And maybe someday I'll have to have you on to cover one of the science fiction books, because we have special guests all the time. So I might just, if I assign you a book for that, then you have to read it, because you have.
Oh God, more homework. I mean, I'll do it.
Well, and check it out. Go listen to see, like we did an episode on Canticle for Leibowitz, and so you can see like kind of what's entailed on it. But we have a lot of fun like breaking down the books, but I think that banner list is the one that's gonna get you.
All right, I'm definitely gonna check it out.
All right, Joe, thanks for joining me on Postcards from a Dying World, and folks, we'll see you next time.